she was my grandmother was an excellent seamstress, and at that time there were a lot of Jewish plays, and the actors. She used to make dresses for them and stuff like that. And so one of the areas that she went to was Ohio, and while she was there, a rich family saw her. She was again a beautiful lady, and they had a son who had been married but was divorced, and they fixed up my grandma with her. And again, it would be and so she married Mr. Mackman, and Mr. Mackman then adopted my uncle Harry and uh, and my
And your mom
mother, right? And then my grandmother Lena had three more children.
with Mr.
My
Mackman.
With Mr. Mackman. Yeah, and there was my uncle Arthur, my aunt Florence, and my aunt Betty. And then there was also one other child that was born, and they were still at the. It was the first one that was born, and they were still living in Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio. And um, my grandmother was making some apples with where you dip the apples in a red sauce, and it spilled on her and burned her, so she had to go to the hospital. And the baby was about 8 months old, 9 months old. And at that time they let you bring the baby to the hospital, and she was so beautiful that the nurses carried her around, and she caught an illness from one of the patients and died while my grandmother was in the hospital for her.
Oh, the
The
baby
baby
died.
died. Yeah, and then the baby died, and I forgot its. I have its name on my, but I forgot what it
So
was exactly.
he was the
Uh,
first. He was the first baby with Mr. Mackman.
Right, right. And then my uncle Artie, and my aunt Florence, and then my auntie Betty. My auntie Betty is the same age as my sister, so it was my grandmother was pregnant at the same time as my mother was. Mr. Mackman uh,
What was
was
his
a
first
nice.
name?
Was
Because he was kind
I
of a guardian angel for them, no?
sort of, but she was the one that was the worker. My grandmother was the worker, and he did work for, I think, a dairy, but he then started getting uh, bad legs. His legs became sore, and my grandmother, he couldn't work anymore, so she got rid of him. She sent him back to Ohio, where his relatives were mostly doctors, very high, they were wealthy, a wealthy family, and she sent it back there, and
She
she
ran
started
this
to
whole family, all five kids.
right. She raised right. She was involved in real estate. She started. They would. My mother said one year she moved from eight different houses. She would come home, and the house that she was living in was somebody else living there, and then her mother would find her and bring her to a new house. And then right after the depression hit, okay, um my grandmother was a multimillionaire. She had built up, like, she owned blocks of houses. They came back to Milwaukee, and he was working in a dairy, and she started buying. She'd buy a house, fix it, move the family in it, fix the house up, and sell it like people do nowadays. But she was one of the only people doing it. I mean, she was involved in it, and she did it. My mother said, one year she moved 8 times, and one day she came home and there were a new family already in the house. She would do that from one house, then she would buy another house, and then sometimes she would keep the houses. And then she owned like a whole block of houses. And a man by the name, a, a supposedly rich man from a Jewish man, his name was Michael Shapiro, came and upped her with a deal that he would give her all of this business property that was thriving, where when it was all packed, in exchange for her houses. plus a cash of $25,000 at the time. Again,
Wow.
20. Okay. And so she takes the check, and when she goes to look at the houses, out the businesses, I mean, and all of the businesses were going, they had furniture in there and everything. And she closes the deal, and she goes back there a week later, and every one of them is closed. What he had done is, his brother owned a furniture store. He had filled all the businesses up with material, so it looked like they were businesses. And now she's only got the $25,000 check. She takes it to the bank, it bounces. She finds out he's in jail for tax evasion. So she goes to the jail with a box of cigars and candy, a box of candy, to get a new check from him. That's not going to bounce. And she gives it to him, and he gives her a new check, and it bounces, and that's it. Now she's poor. That's all she has, is maybe the house she's living in, and I don't know. But my aunt remembers it. My mother didn't seem to bother her that much, but my aunt was used to wearing new clothes, and now she had to wear the old clothes from her sisters, and that changed the family a lot. And then